G'day Groovers, welcome to the U Project. This is the conclusion of the chat that we had yesterday, maybe not yesterday when you listened to it, but this is part 2 of my chat with Paul Taylor, exploring all things the human condition. Enjoy.
And it's like you bring up a really interesting point. The placebo effect is mediated around expectation, right? So that when the patient expects there to be a positive benefit, there is much more likely to be a positive benefit. And that expectation switches on different areas of the brain. And it's not always the same area. So this is what they're now digging into, is the neurobiological mechanisms of the placebo effect. Like how is it mediated? What identifiable brain structures become active in order to create the healing effect, right? And then the hope for some people is that if we can identify these brain areas, can we use something like transmagnetic cranial stimulation, TMS, right? Can we just stimulate certain parts of the brain? Because we have the ability to do that now through TMS, is to switch on certain brain areas. So are we able to use that? Or do we just bring the placebo into medical treatment and have more doctors prescribing placebos as a first line intervention before you get an actual drug, right? So there's all sorts of ethical considerations to
I was going to say it's an ethical potpourri of potential fucking lawsuits and issues. But like the thing is, and I've said a version of this many times, but you know, if somebody's in a situation where there's no danger, they're in a room or whatever, someone walks in and sits down and all of a sudden they tell themselves a story that other person in the room is a threat, and not just a threat, but an imminent threat, even though they're not, and there is no danger, they're not in harm's way. Despite the reality of the situation, no danger, the inner dialogue is massive danger. And then the physiological response is, you know, like a stress state. So heart rate, adrenaline, cortisol, all that shit, right? Breathing, sympathetic nervous system. So now they are in a self-created stress state. So like we can literally, irrespective of what is actually happening external to us, we can create a complete physiological shift from you know, endocrine system to nervous system to respiratory to cardiovascular system in a second or two with a thought or with an idea that we believe. Like the power of believing in something. I believe this pill is going to heal me. That's powerful. I believe that guy's a threat. That's powerful. I believe someone's coming in the back door with a machete, but they're not. That's powerful. You know, if we could tap into that and manage that.
That's the thing about our brains, as I always say, we've got amazing brains, right? We're having quite a highbrow conversation with ethical considerations and stuff like that. We can switch this now to talking about religion and whether God exists, or metacognition, you know, the fact that you can think about stuff. All of that is really high level brain function, right? You don't hear fucking badgers discussing metacognition, right? But the point is that
you don't see any of them on Xanax either.
That's right, exactly. But the point is that this amazing brain of ours is a double-edged sword, because we're the only species whose thoughts can activate the stress response system. So just like you say, I can sit there thinking this person's a threat, or I can sit there catastrophizing about the future and whether my kids are going to be all right or they're going to be fucked up. Or I can actually sit and ruminate about some bullshit that happened 20 years ago, or an argument that happened last week. And I can actually now explain the physiology, right? That releases nuclear factor kappa bravo, and that then triggers inflammatory cytokines, and that causes your liver to release acute phase proteins and acute phase reactants that actually make you feel shit, that sap your energy. Inflammation is released that then triggers the accumulation of fat around the middle, and that visceral fat is metabolically active and creates its own inflammatory cytokines, and all of this inflammation then drives chronic disease states.
Now you're just showing off. Now you're just fucking showing off.
But that's what can happen when you just think bad shit. Now, conversely, I would love to see an experiment where people are thinking more constructive, positive thoughts associated with outcomes. And we need to be really rigorous, right? This isn't about the secret and friggin' think it and you will get it. And this is about how do we try to through really well designed studies create that positive self-talk that's going to trigger certain brain areas to become active, certain neurotransmitters, anti-inflammatory cytokines to actually become released, right? Because we know that exercise will do it, breathing will do it, and we know that negative thinking releases those pro-inflammatory cytokines. I suspect that constructive thinking, and I'm using that term rather than positive thinking because I think some of the positive psychology has gone a little bit too far, but that sort of constructive more positive frameworks in the brain, it's the areas of the brain that become active and the chemicals that are released that is really potentially very interesting to study and say, is there a way that we can switch those on at will?
And I think I think that is a great question. Then we start to become consciously in control of our own biology, and being able to pay attention to, when I go down this, cognitive rabbit hole, this happens, or I feel this, or when I overthink that, or when I replay that story, or when I open that door on that thing that happened 2 years ago, this is how I feel, but conversely, when I'm listening to music, or when I'm, it's trying to,
when I'm in nature, when I'm with friends, we know all of those things release anti-inflammatory hormones.
Yeah. Right? And then understanding that, it's like for you and me, for example, if I said, mate, I've got a gig for you tomorrow, it's 3 hours, it's 2,000 people, it's, it's 12 grand, not that matters, but it's 2,000 people, live auditorium, you've got the day off, and I want you to get up there and share all your shit. You probably, if you're like me, which you are, your predominant emotion would be, somewhere between motivation and excitement and happiness, right?
Yeah.
For 98% of the population, it would be fucking terror. Right? It would be fucking overwhelming terror, and they would drive interstate and they would go and live in secret for 6 months, But again, that's just individual variability, isn't it?
That's right. There's lots of individual variability in the system. There's no doubt about it. But look, for me, it's how do we get really rigorous research around some of these psychological interventions, right? Some of them we have tried with good intentions, but they've ended up being a disaster. And I tell you what that one is this whole focus on enhancing people's self-esteem. By telling little Johnny or little Marie that they're friggin' awesome and they can be anything they want to be, and boosting their self-esteem is the greatest bunch of horse shit that has ever come out of psychology, in my personal opinion, right? And it's actually created, and this came out of well-intentioned research around the 70s and 80s in the United States, where they thought that having someone of high self-esteem actually predicted their success in life. So they started boosting self-esteem deliberately in schools. And now there's so much of this that is just in with our kids around boosting self-esteem. And I think it's the wrong path to go down. We need to be boosting their ability to self-regulate, right? And self-control, because there is an enormous amount of evidence that has come out from Walter Mischel's marshmallow study, the Dunedin study in New Zealand, where they've been following people for 30 years and showing that the ability to self-regulate, the ability to actually control your emotions, is the single biggest predictor success in life.
What are the things that, like, if we chuck around things like willpower, discipline, consciousness, awareness, all of these things, what have they discovered is important in being able to self-regulate?
So look, that is a great question that people have not nailed yet, to my knowledge. So somebody may give me more information. There is some research around stuff that can be useful in that capacity to self-regulate, but a lot of it seems to be wired quite early in our lives, that ability to self-regulate. And we know that those who do end up, they pursue their long-term goals much more. They are significantly more successful later in life, and this is no matter what their the income level of their parents. And in the Dunedin study, they weren't actually expecting to see that, right? And they said that with every increase in the gradient on self-control, it actually had a concomitant increase in their success 20 years later. And those with low self-control had more drug use, had shorter attention span, and more distractible. They had worse impulse control, and they couldn't wait their turn. They're more emotionally liable, all of this sort of stuff, right? So some stuff that has actually come out around things that we can do to improve our self-control is really around the loop of decision making, right? And it's looking at situational and attentional and appraisal interventions, right? So, for example, you walk into the room and there's a Krispy Kreme donut sitting there, right? So what happens there is that is actually firing up dopamine in your brain that is goal-directed behaviors that go and eat that, right? So a situational thing that we can do is actually ask somebody to remove it, or better still, don't buy shit food, right? So it's not in the house, right? So we actually take away the situation, right? And this is the sort of stuff that me and you have talked about for decades. Another approach is the sort of Japanese psychology approach, which is shifting your attention and understanding that your attention is the greatest thing that is within your control, right? And that's what the kids in the marshmallow study did. So 40 years ago, is they shifted their attention away from the marshmallow. They distracted themselves.
Now, for the 20% of my listeners who don't know about that study, just give a quick snapshot of what that was about.
So Walter Mischel, 40 odd years ago, brought a bunch of kids in and gave them a marshmallow and said, hey, we're going to leave the room. And when we come back, if you haven't eaten that marshmallow, you'll get another marshmallow, right? And about a third of the kids, no sooner was the person out of the room than they ate the marshmallow. Another third tried a little bit, and then, they kind of picked it up and they went, oh, I just want to smell it. And then boom, it's gone. And then about another third used strategies. Either they looked away or there were some games in the corner of the room. They went and did it. Some of them covered the marshmallow up and they waited much, much longer. But his PhD students followed him up. So 17 years later, I think, it actually predicted who went to university. Right. Irrespective of the income level of the parents, those who waited for longer were much more likely to go to university. Right. And then another PhD student followed them up 40 years on, found that those who waited the longest had higher school grades, but also were able to cope with teenage problems. They had higher levels of education, irrespective of the education or income level of their parents. They'd lower substance abuse, alcohol, drugs, smoking, lower divorce, less conflict with the law, and less fat, right? And the researchers in Dunedin followed up. They did something similar, and they actually weren't expecting to see it because some people had criticized Mischel's study, but they found exactly the same thing, right? So that's the famous marshmallow study that is now being followed up with that whole Dunedin study that I think has shed some light on it. But the other things that we can do. So there's a few things that have come out in the research. So situational stuff. Avoid the situation, right? When I was trying to get really fit for my professional boxing fight, I had to change the way I walked home because I walked home past Dan Murphy's every night. And I'm Irish, I'm ex-military, I like a tipple. So I changed the way that I walked home. I had an agreement with Carly, we took alcohol out of the house, right? So there are those sort of situational things that you can do. You just avoid the situation, or you create situations for habits that you're trying to make, right? You pack your gym gear, blah, blah, blah. You know, all of that stuff. Then there's the attention stuff. It's just about shifting your attention. That Japanese psychology, you shine the flashlight of your attention somewhere else. And then there are appraisal strategies that we can do. We can look at that Krispy Kreme going up. We can go, God, that tastes good. But we can go, yeah, but it's also a calorie bomb. And I know that when I have it, I feel shit. Right. So you reappraise the situation. So there are some things that we can actually do that can help us with our self-control. But I think it's an area where they're just starting to do so much more research because they realize the importance of self-control in your future life success.
Isn't it interesting, pursuant to what you just said, Your Honor, how many products and programs are directed at people based really on instant gratification?
Oh, totally.
You know, it's like because marketers are just cleverer psychologists.
Yeah,
I think.
Yeah, brilliant.
Marketing people are just psychologists who are making more money, right?
Yeah.
So that's all they are, is because marketing is
it's
just
like human behavior, right?
It is, right? It's how do I manipulate, influence people to get what I want, which is to sell more shit, right? And so what do I know? Well, I know that people don't want to work hard. I know that people don't want pain or discomfort or uncertainty. And I know that they want the result without the reward. So let me come up with some shit that will give them what they think is going to be a disproportionate reward for what they're investing, you know, exactly. And whether that's 2-minute abs or whether that's fucking get rich quick or, you know, people, there's probably the number one marketing strategy is to tap into that human desire for instant or close to instant gratification.
Look, absolutely. And it's the way that our brains are wired is that our brains give preference to stuff that is time efficient rewards, clear and present rewards or dangers. So it's a process called temporal discounting in the brain that we know that explains everything from why people don't exercise, or even if their dad died of heart disease or their mom died of diabetes, how it's really hard to shift them is because temporally, as in time-based, we discount rewards in the future, right? That we will actually go, and we do this subconsciously, is that, yes, this is a really good reward, but because it's so far away, it's not so much important. And so you're trying to talk to people about exercising and eating well so they don't get heart disease. And then they walk out of your shop and there's a freaking Krispy Kreme donut or a vanilla slice right there. It is clear and present. And this is because in the caveman days, you might not have been alive next week, right? So you go for things that are about immediacy, and we discount stuff in the future. That explains everything from health behavior to why people don't put more money in their super. Because when you explain to people compound interest, they go, oh, fuck, I get it. And then you go, right, now you need to put an amount of money into your super, and actually you can put this amount extra in, but it means you have to forgo your coffee every day. And they go, fuck that.
You know, I've shared this at least once on this podcast, but over 500 shows, I can share it again. Some people have heard it, some haven't. So I had a dude, it might've been around the time you and I were working together at
Harper's.
And he came to see me. He rang up he came from the country. He wanted me to oversee his training. And so meeting with me once a month, I'd set him a month of homework with him, set goals, structure, process, organization, accountability, diary, fill out your shit. Let's talk on the phone once a week. I'll see you every 4 weeks. So I'll see you 12, 13 times a year, blah, blah, blah. He read something I wrote in a magazine and was all over it. I'm like, great. Came down, morbidly obese, lots of issues, all good though. Nice dude. We had a 2-hour meeting. Or 2 hours, I trained him, assessed him of sorts, and then another hour or so chatting. We talk about, mindset, accountability, structure, programming, changing his operate, all that kind of stuff that I do, that you do. We went deep. There were tears. There was a hug at the end. He was so grateful. We talked about his relationship with food and the instant gratification stuff and the stories and the bullshit. And it was like he had some fucking breakthrough. He was so happy. I'm like, all right, well, fuck off and be amazing, and I'll see you in 4 weeks. So he took off. Now, where the old gym was compared next to Centre Road.
Yeah.
Now, so 200, for those people who don't know, which is most 100 meters from a road called Centre Road, you go straight up Centre Road. There's a plethora of shops and restaurants and cafes and banks and supermarkets. Anyway, so I head up to, I don't know where I was going, somewhere, get lunch or to go to the bank or something. And I'm about, I don't know, a kilometre up Centre Road. I'm on the motorbike and I ride past this dude who's sitting outside a bakery with all the shit in the world, like fucking donuts, pies. No, he was eating a pie at the time and he had at least another pie or two. He had a chocolate Big M or similar. And he had another white bag full of, I suppose, pastries. And he didn't know it was me because I had a helmet on. That was literally 12 minutes after he walked out of my office. And I mean, mate, we just had 2 hours and we had tears and we had snot and we had what I thought was breakthroughs. And I was shaking. I'm like, I'm either completely shit at my job or I don't know what is going on. And, anyway, I rang him later that day and I told him. So we had another moment and I said, it's like fucking hell. Like he didn't last quarter of an hour.
No, and that's the thing is that these circuits in the brain are very, very powerful. And we know that for drug addicts, alcoholics, and obese individuals, there's significant change in the circuitry around motivation and drive to influence behavior. So there's areas in the brain, to simplify the circuits, go, no go, right? So there's areas in the brain that create a drive to do a behavior. And then there's the willpower, which is the handbrake, the no go. And we know that in all of those subjects, whether it's drugs, alcohol, or whether it's food, that when you're giving in regularly, so when they become addicts or obese or whatever because of food, that the go areas of the brain become strengthened, and the emotional salience of this stuff, like the emotional value and the impact it has on brain function, is much more increased. And the no-go areas of the brain actually shrink. The areas that are to do with willpower and self-control, and we know where they are, they actually shrink. They reduce in volume when you're constantly giving in, right? And that's the thing. And then, similar to that, the amount of dopamine receptors actually reduces. And it seems to be a feedback loop. This is from Vera, or what's her name, Volkov, the amazing scientist who works at the Institute of Health in the United States. She showed in a number of experiments that when you're constantly taking a drug, lots of it, or lots of alcohol, or lots of comfort food, dopamine receptors, the DR4 receptor, actually reduce in density and number. And it's basically the brain's way of going, whoa, there's way too much of this dopamine coming in. I need to do something about it. So it reduces the amount of receptors, which means you need more just to achieve the same effect. So this is the neurobiology of tolerance. So we know that in people who have succumbed to certain behaviors, that their brain circuitry actually changes so that behavior is much more likely to happen. So the lower down you get, it actually becomes a stronger downward pull. And it's actually a brain condition. That food-related obesity is a similar category as drug addiction and alcohol addiction and other forms of addiction.
What about let me tell you another story, and this is speaking to this. So, Melissa, do you remember when I did a gig in Geelong? What was the name of that joint? Ridges or something?
Yeah, Ridges.
Was that 300-seat room?
Yeah, that one.
Yeah. So do you remember I sat on the stage, and at the end, so I did a 3-hour gig, Paul, and the stage, it's a weird room. The stage is about 4 feet up. So I'm literally, so my head is kind of 10 feet above everyone, and I'm looking down. Anyway, it was weird. So, but that's a side issue. At the end of the day, I said, all right, let's do, for anyone who wants to go, we're done. But for the rest of you, I'll sit here for 20 minutes and do Q&A if you want. So the 3 hours was up, and this lady goes, so her question was, have you got any tips on how I give up chocolate? I'm good at everything else. I exercise. I don't eat any other junk, but I can't stop eating chocolate. And I go, well, you can stop eating chocolate, but you won't. She goes, no, I literally can't. I go, so you are telling me that it's just not possible? She goes, yes. I go, well, that's part of the problem because that's your belief. So you're creating that, right? Because that's just not fucking true. She goes, no, you don't understand. I go, no, you don't understand. And so there's 299 people looking at her, looking at me, and we were having a friendly argument, right? And I said, all right, do you want me to prove to you that you can give up chocolate? She goes, you can't. I go, well, do you want me to try? She goes, yes. I go, so we're at near Corio Bay, which is Geelong. I put you on my boat and I take you out to an island that's 100 Ks offshore, wherever the fuck that is. I put you on the island and you've got everything on the island that you need. You've got a gym, you've got internet, you've got great food, but there's no chocolate. And I leave you there. And then I go home and I come back a year later. How much chocolate have you eaten? And she's like, oh, well, that's yeah, was it? Yeah. And I go, but
you're cheating.
Yeah. I go, but well, there's no chocolate, so you can't eat any, right? And she goes, well, I mean, if there's no chocolate, well, I go, cool. So, the chocolate in your house, how does that get there? Like, does the chocolate fairy bring that? I go, what if you didn't go and buy it? I mean, I know this is, call me fucking wacky, but what if you didn't buy it? And what if you didn't take it to your house? In fact, what if there wasn't any chocolate in your house? Like, and obviously, but how weird is it that we tell ourselves stories like, I can't not eat chocolate. And then we get to the point where we create that reality, that self-imposed reality, not because of anything other than a fucked belief.
And how many listeners are listening to this and going, yeah, there's shit food in my house, but I buy it for the kids.
Yes.
I tell you what, your kids are the people who need it the least because their bodies are the most prone to damage from all of this shit food. So if it's for the kids, don't buy the bloody stuff. Right?
And also not just physiologically, but psychologically, you're setting up them for habituating around shit food. So they take that habit and that operating system into adulthood because they grew up on shit food.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, mate, it's been awesome. Melissa, where are we at with time? Is that about 1:20?
About 1:15.
1:15. Well, I reckon you can do something with that, Melissa. PT, what's the name? I know we're co-sharing. Tell my listeners the name of your podcast.
So it is the Mind, Body, Brain Project podcast. I nicked the project off yours.
Yeah, well, that's all right. That's good. I couldn't think of anything as fancy or long as that.
And can I just give a little shameless plug? We are our Better You program, which is our second public program, is launching on the 19th of July. So people can go to my website, mindbodybrain.com.au, and you'll see the Better You program there. Anybody who's interested can go and jump on it.
Mate, I actually do some, yes, everybody go and have a look at Paul's program. It's a ripper. I have very good feedback from many people about that. So check it out. I'm actually running some workshops on how to speak Australian. So I might book you in because you're struggling.
Back to back.
For somebody who's been here for, I don't know, decades now, you're really struggling. But anyway.
I am. That is true.
Mate, we appreciate you. Thank you for being part of the frivolity and for being an alumni, a repeat offender on the U Project. You are probably in the top three, definitely in the top three of favorites for our listeners. They all love every time you're on. So we appreciate you. And Melissa, thank you for sitting there patiently listening to us two old fuckwits bang on for an hour and a half.
Thank you to both of you. That was, well, a lot of fun, but also very interesting. So thank you.
And very random and unscripted and unplanned, right? And I will just throw in, because it is random and unscripted and unplanned for my listeners. I think most of them know anyway, but the U Project is your podcast, which is friggin' awesome. We'll just finish by pissing in each other's pocket.
Well, but mutual admiration society, because we've both got big egos and low self-esteem. So we do what we can. We've both got a lot of issues, but we don't hide it. All right, everyone. Love your guts. See you next time.